Good afternoon and welcome back to our Girl Scout virtual programs. My name is Honora and I work for the Girl Scouts of Suffolk County, and Denzel and I are dedicating our time this week to show you some culinary creations or cooking. For our brownies, we'll be doing a cheese please theme. So we will be making an oven baked mac and cheese that is sure to be a great comfort food for a time like this. So grab an adult because you will be using an oven, you'll be using a stove, and you'll use a cheese grater to grate your cheese. So let's get started. For this recipe, you'll need some elbow macaroni, some olive oil, 6 tablespoons of unsalted butter, a third of a cup of all-purpose flour, 3 cups of whole milk, 1 cup heavy whipping cream, and you'll need assorted cheese. I used cheddar, mozzarella cheese, and smoked Gouda. You'll need some salt and pepper to taste, and you'll need some breadcrumbs, more butter, parmesan cheese, smoked paprika, but we'll get into that later. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to lightly grease a baking dish, and you'll be setting that aside, but you don't want your macaroni to stick, so you will grease your baking dish. And then you will also preheat your oven to 350 degrees and start boiling some water for the pasta. I put my elbow macaroni into my boiling water. I added a little salt as well. So for this next part, while my macaroni is cooking or being boiled, I'm adding 6 tablespoons to a saucepan on a medium to high heat. You really want your butter to melt nicely. My butter was room temperature, so it melted a little quicker than it might if it had just come out of the refrigerator. So you'll let that nicely melt. Once your butter melts, we're going to be adding our flour, and it's called making a roux. This is the first step to making any kind of cream sauce. So little by little, you're going to be adding your flour, and you will whisk this as you're doing it. You don't want to add too much and then just let it sit. You really want to continuously whisk it so that the roux is nice and creamy. So as you see, I am mixing and whisking so that there's no clumps. It's going to be nice and creamy, nice and smooth. Just keep adding spoonfuls until you have completed adding your flour. And as you see, there's a couple of the chunks, but you'll start to see as I add the rest of my flour that it'll start to gather into a thick paste. But if you let it sit for a second, the heat really helps it to melt the butter and get to a creamy consistency. You can see it's starting to bubble and get more golden. So now it is time to add my milk and my heavy cream. And just like you did with the flour, you will be gradually adding your milk to the pan because you really want it to start to get nicely thick and creamy. And when you add milk to a roux, that's when it's called a bechamel sauce. And that's any great start to a mac and cheese. And I'm going back and forth between adding the milk and then the heavy cream, the milk and then the heavy cream. But if you'd like, you could always mix the heavy cream and the milk together into one mixture and gradually add it that way. Okay, now I kept whisking it until I saw bubbles form. And see how nice and creamy that is? That's a great start. So the next steps is to add our assorted cheese. And like I said, you can use any type of cheese. I recommend using a creamier cheese like mozzarella cheese or cheddar. I'm using a sharp cheddar. I'm using a smoked Gouda, and a little mozzarella cheese, I shredded it all together and put it in one bowl. So now I'm gradually sprinkling the cheese into my cream sauce, and I am folding the cheese in so that it melts nice and evenly. And then I can transfer to using a whisk after it really starts to melt, so that we don't get too many clumps in there. Okay, and you're gonna let that sit for just a second. You can see it start to bubble. You don't want to overcook it, so now I am turning my heat down to a simmer or a low heat, and then adding the rest of my cheese. I'm moving my pan over, and I strained out my macaroni, my elbow macaroni, and put about a tablespoon or two of olive oil, just so that the macaroni doesn't stick to itself, and it'll even add to the texture of it, so it'll be even more creamier. And now I'm going to transfer my elbow macaroni into the cheese sauce that we just made. And just like I did with the cheese, I'm going to fold my macaroni into the cheese sauce until the macaroni is fully coated. Look at that. You could even eat it just like this, but we're gonna bake it. So the next part is a very important part. You're going to want to transfer your elbow macaroni into your baking dish. I'm spraying mine with a little Pam spray just to make sure that the elbow macaroni doesn't stick. And I'm using half of my mixture and putting it into the baking dish. Using a ladle, it's a little easier. So we are transferring half the mixture into the baking dish, flattening it out so that we get a nice even meal. Maybe add a couple more scoops. And now I can also use the back of my spoon to really get that nice and even in the baking dish. So then the second half of the macaroni, I'm going to be adding some more of my cheddar cheese or whatever cheese you're using. I'm just going to shred a good amount right on top. And just like I did when I incorporated the cream sauce with the macaroni, I'm going to fold that cheese into my second half of the macaroni. Probably adding about a cup. So now I'm folding that cheese in. And adding it back into the dish to be baked. Okay, so now we have about a cup and a half of breadcrumbs. There's about a tablespoon of paprika, about a cup of parmesan, grated parmesan cheese, and 4 tablespoons of butter that has been melted. I'm going to add my dry ingredients to the breadcrumbs first, so my parmesan cheese, I'm going to put that in there. Grab a spoon, mix it up nice. Then I'll add some paprika. You don't have to add the paprika. That is something you can choose to do. I just like paprika. It's a smoky paprika. So we're gonna mix that into the mixture as well. Get it nice and combined. And now I am going to add my butter. This is going to help the breadcrumbs be adhesive to the macaroni, so it'll have a nice crunchy, crispy top to it. So we're gonna mix this as best we can all together until it's combined. See, it's starting to clump together. That's okay, that's what you want. The butter is going to continue to bind it all together. And now we can add our breadcrumbs right on top of our macaroni You want to make sure you get it all over so it has a nice coating on top. And then I'm going to use a flat spatula to really flatten the top out, make it nice and even so it evenly cooks, so we don't have some darker spots than others when it's cooking in the oven. Then you'll put it in your oven at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, it'll have a nice darker top to it. It'll be nice and crispy on top. And look at that macaroni. Super cheesy, buttery, crispy. Nice golden crisp top to it. Bon appetit!